walked away.
Oh my
Now,
God.
first, Joe Bennett, you put yourself in the situation of having crab ravioli in front of you and asking a waiter for Parmesan. Would you do it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it would improve crab ravioli. I mean, the whole subtle crab thrown into a great slab of pasta is a mistake in the first place, and only Parmesan would save it. I was in a posh London restaurant once on an expense account, I'll have to say, someone else's expense account, and I ordered a steak, and the sneering ponytailed waiter sort of took my order and turned away, and I said, and I'll have it well done, thank you. And he turned on one heel and said, our steaks are served rare, and walked away. And I thought, me, customer, you bloody servant. But I almost said it as well. But anyway, yeah.
Isn't there
if someone else hadn't been paying, I would have done.
Isn't there, Joe, something to be said for actually learning the language of fine food and the fact that he's teaching you all about the subtle flavours of crab ravioli?
If you're saying that seriously, Wallace, I'm just putting down the microphone and going home right now.
I am. Come on.
Oh, wow, for God's sake. De gustibus non est disputandum. You can't account for taste. I like my steaks done like a running shoe, and no one will educate me out of that.
You're kidding me. Claire, what do you hear when you hear someone like Joe say that sort of stuff?
Oh, well, I
Just
think
admiration.
Absolute admiration. Well, each to their own, but I mean, you've got to. There are several sides to this particular story, and also, why does it go viral? First of all, don't people have better things to do than to read about someone else's gripe about what happened in a restaurant? Just
because
saying.
We can all relate to it. We can all relate to the fact that who are they to tell us, as Joe says, how we like our food?
True, I get that. You might want to have that bit of cheese on it, but what if you asked for a big smear of Marmite on it? This is the guy's dish. Maybe it's his signature
Good point.
dish. And he's thinking, hey, I've gone to a lot of trouble. It's been passed down through the generations. And here you are, and you want to put Marmite all over this ravioli.
The chef is not doing it as a favour for the diner. He's selling him something. The customer is always right.
Nearly always right.
Nearly always right, Joe.
What hacks me off, though, is I do think seasoning of a general type, salt and pepper, is very individual. You can go into some restaurants and there will not be salt and pepper provided.
Do you know why? I asked a waiter once why. He said,
because you might nick them.
Because people steal the pepper mills.
Well, that's why they make pepper mills that are about 3 foot tall, and they come along very ostentatiously, ask you if you'd like pepper on your meal before you've even tried it.
That gets me oiling my gun.
In terms of the simple gastronomy, just end on a sort of final note, and a light note about the gastronomy fair, Joe Bennett loved his pepperoni and Swiss cheese combination in a sandwich. What's a simple something that you die for?
Me?
Yeah, in terms of food.
I just like really nice, in winter, nice vegetable soup, chicken and vegetable soup.
Beautiful.
Yes, just something very simple, and nice silky scrambled eggs or something like that. Yeah.
Oh.
Like not kind of mashed to bits in a bowl. No, horrible.
Yeah.
Just something very simple.
Just simple winter stuff, eh?
I'm a simple person. Very simple.
Yeah.
Simple tastes.
Oh my gosh, you two have done it again. My goodness gracious me. Joe, stay warm. And we are the little there. And Claire, great to have you on the show. Joe Bennett, Claire, you've been wonderful.
Bye, Joe.
I'm Wallace Chapman. See you tomorrow. Till then, bye.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi a Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. Good evening, I'm Alex Perrottet. On tonight's programme, rumblings in the regions as the government announces the biggest ever shake-up of the Polytech sector, are successful institutes set to lose their autonomy and hard-earned assets. A contractor claims a Canterbury construction firm owes him thousands after staff say they too are out of pocket. Is 5G the real deal or just 4G with a facelift? Either way, it will be here by Christmas. The US offered $1 million for his whereabouts. Now it's saying Osama bin Laden's son, Hasma bin Laden, is dead. Should she or shouldn't she go to Ihumātao? The acting PM, Kelvin Davis, says Jacinda Ardern should steer clear of the land dispute in South Auckland when she returns. And was Joe Biden knocked off his perch finally as Democrat presidential nominee frontrunner in the last debate?
RNZ News at 5. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. The government has set aside nearly $200 million for its reforms of radical apprenticeships and polytechnics. The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, today announced he will merge the 16 polytechs into a single national institute in April next year. Mr Hipkins says the change will save money in the long term and the current system is unsustainable and needs to change.
We've set aside a contingency of just under $200 million to support the reform process, and if more money is required, then we'll address that when we get to it. That's going to get us a long way down the road to getting these reforms implemented, though.
Chris Hipkins says if the government had done nothing, it would still have had to spend millions of dollars on failing polytechnics. A judge has described the 8 people convicted of their part in killing a Ngarawahia man and disposing of his body at McLaren Falls as a group of vigilantes. Justice Peters today sentenced one of the main offenders, Simon Walker, to 7 years jail for the kidnapping and manslaughter of Mitchell Patterson. Andrew McRae was in the High Court at Hamilton.
Walker held Mr Patterson in a chokehold in the back of a car while the 26-year-old fought to get away. On arrival at a local gang leader's home, Mr Patterson was found to be dead. Justice Peters said nothing could possibly justify anyone acting like vigilantes to kidnap him. She accepted it wasn't the intention to kill him, but pointed out that even in the best scenario, it was never going to end well for Mr Patterson. His father told the court Walker was a despicable person who he despised with every bone in his body. Ko Andrew McRae tēnei.
Vodafone's plan to roll out the first 5G mobile network by December has surprised the industry. Vodafone announced earlier today that it will launch 5G in Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch and Queenstown. It will spend tens of millions of dollars transitioning 120 of its cell sites to 5G and upgrading about 400 to its 4G sites. It's a change of tack for Vodafone, which previously took a backseat with 5G, letting its rival Spark publicise its plan to be the first. The chief executive of the Telecommunications Users Association, Craig Young, says Vodafone's jump on Spark is quite the surprise.
We had seen some earlier comments by the leadership at Vodafone that they wouldn't rush into building a 5G network because they had other things to do. So actually hearing today that they intend to be ready by December, it was a little bit of a surprise, actually.
Craig Young of Tuans there. A high-profile sportsman connected to an international drug syndicate has lost a second attempt to keep his identity secret. The sportsman was named during the trial of a trio found guilty of importing methamphetamine from California at the High Court at Auckland earlier this year. At trial, the presiding judge, Justice Downs, refused to grant name suppression, but the man's lawyer, Mike Heron QC, indicated he would appeal the decision. The Court of Appeal heard the case last month and issued its decision today, dismissing the appeal and declining name suppression. The sportsman has until Tuesday afternoon to seek leave to appeal the decision to the Supreme Court. If he does not, he can be named on Thursday next week. Search and rescue staff remain on standby after an avalanche near Queenstown this afternoon. The police say no one is believed to have been caught up in the avalanche, which is reported to be one ridge over from the remarkable ski field. The avalanche advisory has an alert in place for dangerous conditions in high alpine areas around Queenstown, lowering to a heightened risk between 1,800 and 1,200 metres. The Mountain Safety Council spokesperson Nick Kingstone says multiple storm fronts have been bringing low-falling snow, increasing the risk of avalanches in alpine areas.
The challenging conditions out there, it's very dangerous in a lot of places. So I guess our message really is if you're going to head out into the backcountry, really not a time for novices to be heading in. Certainly want to be pretty experienced and able to respond to the challenges out there. And if you are looking to get out and have a ski, maybe staying inside the ski field would be the best option at this point.
And Met Service is warning up to 35 centimetres of snow may settle on some alpine roads overnight as another cold front hits. A hapu north of Auckland says a controversial shooting club should never have been allowed to operate on its maunga because the land is wahitapu or sacred. Auckland Shooting Club, north of Kopakoppa, has been the subject of court battles with the neighbouring mediation centre and locals over its right to operate. Ngāti Rango is supporting the mediation centre and wants the land recognised as a site of cultural significance, which would limit the activities that are allowed on the land. The hapu's kaumatua, William Kapia, says the springs at the top of the maunga are of particular importance.
We know for a fact that one of the springs up here was used for the bathing of warriors before and after a battle. And that's why this is so important to us, because the tapu associated with that particular area is sacred. RNZ
contacted the owner of the gun club, but he did not want to speak on the record. Drivers are being warned to expect delays after a crash between a truck and a bus on the Auckland Harbour Bridge this afternoon, though traffic is now flowing. One person has moderate to minor injuries. It's 5:04. On to RNZ Sport now. The Australia cricket captain Tim Payne says his side's prepared for a hostile reception when the Ashes against England start in Birmingham tonight. Steve Smith, David Warner and Cameron Bancroft make their test returns from suspensions in the wake of the ball tampering saga in South Africa last year. The Barmy Army is set to rip into the Australians, and Payne admits that has the potential to unsettle anyone.
What we've spoken about is that we believe it's going to go up a notch. And we thought the guys handled themselves superbly throughout the World Cup, and someone like Bangers, who hasn't witnessed it yet, but certainly Steve and Dave handled themselves superbly. Traditionally, I feel if you speak about what might happen when it does, you've got the plan in place to handle it.
Australia hold the Ashes after winning the last series in Australia 4-0. The Women's 2023 Football World Cup will be the last opportunity for New Zealand to host a major FIFA tournament, according to New Zealand Football. Following the success of this year's tournament in France, the sport's global governing body has confirmed the next edition of the tournament will increase from 24 to 32 teams. New Zealand is one of 9 countries that have registered an interest in hosting the event, and New Zealand Football Chief Executive Andrew Pragnell says they'll be doing everything they can to ensure they remain a strong contender.
This event is effectively growing exponentially, doubling in size, cycle on cycle. If it continues to grow at this rate, which everyone would anticipate it will, it would be out of our reach, as is the Men's World Cup.
Andrew Pragnell. That's the news.
Trade Me takes flack for moa bone sales.
Trade Me could shut the whole dodgy moa bone trade down tomorrow if they wanted to, since almost all of it is happening on their website.
A coroner steps on toes over child safety.
It's the right of every child to be able to walk to school by themselves. Humans are designed to walk, and it's our superpower.
And the fight continues for the world's steepest street.
If it had happened 2 weeks later, I might not have been quite so bent out of shape, but the day after we lost the Cricket World Cup, I did a full John McEnroe.
Acing it from 6 a.m. every weekday. Morning Report on air and online.
Then on 9 to noon, one of the architects of Sweden's fee-based system explains how that country has seen low-emissions vehicle sales hit historic highs. And after 10, observer food writer Alan Jenkins on gardening as therapy and the benefits of getting up well before dawn. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. Here's the short forecast now from Met Service through to midnight tomorrow, Friday. Warnings and watches are in place for severe westerly gales in many parts of the country tomorrow. So for Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine for the rest of today, scattered rain tomorrow. Waitanapa and Wellington, occasional showers. For the rest of the North Island, occasional showers with some hail, snow above 500 metres in southern and central areas. Squally thunderstorms are possible from Manawatu southwards tomorrow afternoon. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, cloudy periods, isolated showers. Buller and Westland, fine showers tomorrow, some with hail and squally thunderstorms. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, isolated showers, rain developing in Fiordland this evening and spreading elsewhere tomorrow. Snow to 500 metres, isolated thunderstorms and severe southwesterly gales. Heavy snow is possible above 700 metres, and for the Chatham Islands, periods of rain, possibly heavy. It's nearly 8 minutes past 5.
Thanks very much, Paul. Good evening, all. Thank you for joining us. This is Checkpoint. I'm Alex Perrottet. First tonight, the biggest ever shake-up of polytechnics in this country. By this time next year, the nation's 16 polytechnics will be rolled into a single super institute with more than 100,000 students and responsibility for nearly all the country's on-the-job training. It's the death knell for industry training organisations that oversee the apprenticeship system, but their replacements, workforce development councils, will be able to veto courses that just don't make the grade. It's all part of a massive overhaul of apprenticeships and vocational education that the government has announced today. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, says the shake-up is badly needed. He says too many polytechnics are making deficits, too few people are in training, and vocational education and training is far too complex.
If you want to train to be a truck driver right now, there's 19 different qualifications you could do to be a truck driver. If you get into the primary industries, agriculture, horticulture, it's pages and pages and pages of qualifications and programs that are often delivering the same outcome. So by having a national system, there might be fewer of them, but in terms of their availability, that's going to expand rather than contract.
A key change is scrapping industry training organisations. They support 50,000 apprentices and 80,000 other trainees learning on the job at a fraction of the cost of a polytechnic education. But within 3 years, they'll cease to exist. A new National Institute of Technology will take responsibility for on-job training, and workforce development councils will have the power to veto courses that don't meet industry requirements. Josh Williams from the Industry Training Federation says ITOs fought the changes, but now they have to help make them work.
You can configure the vocational system however you want and have as many or as few polytechnics as you want. In the end, people will need to succeed through getting and keeping jobs and having the right skills. And industry, employers, as I say, are the key to whether or not this works.
Warwick Quinn from the Building and Construction ITO says it's essential there is a smooth transition to the new system.
What we don't want to do is disrupt the relationship and the service that employers and apprentices get. We cannot afford to spook employers who don't want to take on a trainee because it's all too hard. It must be seamless and straightforward because we need heaps of skills in construction, as you know, and that shortfall isn't getting any less.
Polytechnics are more positive about the announcement. One of the largest, Manawatu Institute of Technology, says South Auckland students will benefit from the creation in April of a national polytechnic. And at one of the smallest, the Western Institute of Technology at Taranaki, Chief Executive John Snook says he's not worried that small institutes like his will be sidelined.
I think they get the best of both worlds here. I think they get some regional intervention to make sure that we're aligned with the economic development plan of the region, and they also get the support of a central agency that is big enough and has the scale to provide quality programs and learning material that we all need.
But Penny Simmons at the Southern Institute of Technology is less happy. She says the details are yet to be determined and she wants to win a high degree of autonomy for her institution.
There's a legislative process to go through, so that's going to start at the end of this month, and that's when we would hope that New Zealand First and the Greens, who have said that they support some autonomy in the regions, will step up and ensure that enshrined in the legislation.
Meanwhile, the government says it won't be rushing the changes, which will take 3 to 4 years to fully implement at a budgeted cost of $200 million. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
It's 5:12. Invercargill leaders are already vowing to fight the shake-up and they're mulling possible legal action. Stand Up for SET campaign director Carla Forbes, this is about Southland Institute of Technology, says there's widespread fears the merger will kill off the successes of the Southland region.
SIT is probably one of the key economic drivers to Southland. So, I think when SIT sneezes, all of Southland catches a cold. So it is very much, it affects our businesses, it affects our community, it affects the diversity of our communities. The ripple goes really, really far. So pretty much everyone is touched by if they don't employ students. They have, daycares. The whole SIT, I guess, wraps right around Southland. And with their successful model, they give back to the region. So they sponsor a lot of sports, they own assets throughout the community, they give back to the community. So, Southland will be really, really lost when this mega merger happens. It's going to really affect us in lots of ways.
Okay, give us the top one or two because you're saying you're set to lose. What are your main fears?
Look, SIT, some of it, when funding models have changed, SIT has had the autonomy to when others zig, they zag, and they've been really responsive to governmental changes, and that autonomy has been what's really marked our success. They launched zero fees before that even existed in all of the other institutes. When that became something that was nationalised and the whole country was doing something similar, they then introduced a housing bursary. So that autonomy and that innovation has really been part of the success story of SIT that have allowed it to be such a fundamental economic driver here in Southland. And pulling that into one giant sort of organisation is going to, I guess, take away from that unique success model we have and take such a lot away from our community here, but more than financially through the diversity of all of those students coming here. It's really just going to shrink the benefit that it offers Southland.
Now, if you can give us a bit the background of how SIT became such a success story. You did a survey and you've got about 97%, you say, of graduates finding positions of employment. If I read from Chris Hipkins and what he said today, vocational educational system has not been able to keep up with the demand for skills. Are you saying that his sort of gauging of the temperature of these institutions just does not apply to Southland?
There are some very, very broken institutions. That's absolutely true. But he's cast his net very widely over all of these institutions, and Southland has never run at a deficit, never. It has an incredibly high success rate of its students. It's incredibly plugged into the community, so we have pipelines with the Chamber of Commerce to ensure we've got success and we've got employment for our students. So, the casting that same net over the Southern Institute of Technology really doesn't apply, because it's an incredibly successful model that both has a give and take from the community. The entire community feels like it is our asset, hence the gloves off fight that we have had, and I imagine we will be taking on again. I'm heading into a meeting shortly to make a plan of what's next, and I imagine this time the gloves will be off.
You're very passionate in this campaign, and you're saying that you're going to attend a meeting and the gloves are coming off. Take us into that. What's going to happen?
Look, to be honest, we have not decided yet, but I'm meeting with Tim Shadbolt. We're having a collective, I guess, of the Chamber of Commerce will be. They've been very vocal in this as well. We will have, I guess, our community leaders pulling together to find out what we could do. And certainly last time when the threat was put out there, and we thought the Minister may have listened, obviously was quite deaf to Southland's voice, there was nothing that the community wouldn't do. So I imagine that will be tenfold now, because certainly Southland was very loud, and, the Minister couldn't even remember our name. He was, calling it the Southland Institute of Technology, and when I looked at the statistics, he claimed that 48% were in favour of this merger if you exclude Southland. So not only does he not know our name, he actually does not count the submissions from Southland in the national statistics. So that speaks a lot for how the government is feeling about the regions.
Carla Forbes there. Let us know what you think. You can get in touch with some feedback. Dr. Shane Reddy from National saying 1,300 jobs are going to go with that big mega merge that's been called of 16 different polytechs. Do get in touch. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Vodafone is stealing a march on its rivals by unveiling plans to roll out the next generation of mobile communications in New Zealand in December. 5G is held up as a giant leap forward in delivering near-instant internet on mobile devices, but it won't come cheap. Customers will need a new device and will have to pay more for the service. Our business reporter Madison Reedy has the details.
That isn't your typical haka. That was a hologram delivered through a 5G network. A network that's about to be rolled out by Vodafone in Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch and Queenstown come December. That means Vodafone has officially won the race to introduce 5G in this country. Vodafone's chief executive, Jason Paris, is pretty chuffed.
Others have been talking about it. We've been doing it. We're really excited about the opportunities we've seen internationally. We've rolled out 5G in Italy, Spain, Germany and the UK. We can see that customers are enjoying it, but we can really see that it's transforming businesses, and we want to make sure that New Zealand businesses maintain their competitive advantage, so we've brought 5G forward.
The 5G mobile network is expected to be up to 10 times faster than the existing 4G. It has less lag time and enables new technology like higher resolution video and holographic phone calls, like this one.
Tony, let's have a crack at this and see.
Vodafone's been secretly working away on the new network for about 6 months, but has kept it under wraps until today. Mr Paris says it's been able to accelerate its plan to launch 5G since securing new owners who've bought the New Zealand business for $3.4 billion.
Today is also day one of a brand new Vodafone. We've got long-term investors in Brookfield and Infratil, so we're bringing Vodafone New Zealand home, closer to New Zealand, and because of our new owners' belief in this strategy and belief in this organisation, they have allowed us to pull forward this investment and launch it earlier than we intended to.
Over the next 5 months, Vodafone will spend tens of millions of dollars transitioning 120 of its cell sites to 5G and upgrading about 400 of its 4G sites. Some critics think that suggests this is just a 4G facelift, not the full Monty 5G. The chief executive of the Telecommunications Users Association, Craig Young, is in that camp.
Technology across the world, we're seeing a number of these telecommunications companies launching what they're calling 5G when the actual standards for 5G mobile technology have actually yet to be finalised. And so what we're seeing is companies like Vodafone launching using technology that's available at the moment, which is as close to 5G as they can get with the standards that are in place at the moment and with what regulatory authorities such as New Zealand will let them do. So it will be some time since we see the full impact of what we're calling 5G.
But no matter the detail, Vodafone's launch means it's stolen a march on its New Zealand rivals. Spark planned to be the first to launch a 5G network, but hit speed bumps when the GCSB blocked it from using equipment from China's Huawei in its rollout. Spark doesn't seem too deflated though. Here's what its chief executive, Jolie Hodson, had to say on Twitter.
Good to see Vodafone New Zealand and Jason Paris joining Spark on the journey to 5G. We've felt like the lone voice over the last couple of years, so it's pleasing to see our competitors stepping up on this important new technology for New Zealand.
The launch signals a new beginning for Vodafone New Zealand. Its previous leaders took a back seat on 5G, saying that after being the first to launch 2G, 3G and 4G in New Zealand, they'd wait and see with the 5th edition. They were distracted with other things, such as preparing the company to list on the New Zealand Stock Exchange.
We haven't been in a position as Vodafone New Zealand probably over the last 3 or 4 years to place big bets like this. When opportunities have come up, we haven't been in a position to make the most of them. Put a new plan in place in December last year. The organisation, it's been well publicised, has made some really tough choices, and what those tough choices have meant is that now we have confidence and we've created the room for us to make these types of investments, and we've got owners that will back us to make that investment as well.
It seems that Vodafone is now meeting its own motto, that the future is exciting, but possibly not so exciting for customers who'll have to pay a premium for 5G and buy new devices to use it. For Checkpoint, I'm Madison Reedy.
And we'll have more from Madison in the business news just after the headlines. Just after 5:30. It's 22.5 minutes past 5 at the moment. The father of a man who died after being held in a chokehold and whose body was later thrown off a bridge into a river says his son was the victim of a cowardly act. 36-year-old Simon Walker was today sentenced to 7 years in jail after pleading guilty to the kidnapping and manslaughter of a 26-year-old Mitchell Patterson in July last year. He was also sentenced for conspiring to obstruct justice and interfering with human remains. Our reporter Andrew McRae was at the sentencing in the High Court in Hamilton.
Mitchell Patterson had run foul of the then Waikato Nomads gang leader Leon Wilson, who ordered his associates to find him and bring him in for a chat. He was found by Simon Walker, who held him in a chokehold in the back of a car during an 8-minute trip. On arrival, he was found to be dead. In his victim impact statement, Mitchell's father, Craig Patterson, left Walker in no doubt how he felt.
Walker, you have no idea what you have done to our family and close friends, and I doubt you even care. To treat my son as a bag of rubbish, you are a despicable person, and I despise you with every bone in my body.
Mr. Patterson says that death has changed his family's life forever.
To watch my strong-willed, determined, courageous, funny wife change to a wretched, broken-hearted, grief-stricken, quiet person has deeply affected myself, our family, and close friends.
He says his son loved 3 things in life: his mum, his 7-year-old daughter and trucks. Mitchell's mother Valerie told the court that her son is a silent voice at the sentencing and as he has no say, it was up to her.
Our loss is unnatural and it challenges our emotions every day. It causes pain and we struggle with happiness in every way. Mitch was not only our only son, he was our only child. He was the only one to call me mum. The only gift of life that I gave to this world has now been taken away from me forever.
She says her son was a great help when she was diagnosed with cancer, which is now returned.
Mitch was there for me, chatting to me all the time, continually making sure I was okay. When I got the news my cancer had returned and I had to face the battle of dealing with the disease again, I knew it wasn't going to be that constant chatter coming from that familiar voice. Instead, there would be silence, a void.
Crown Prosecutor Jacinda Foster called for a starting point in sentencing of 9 to 10 years.
The genesis of this offending in the context of serious crime, and that is the kidnapping here, and the gang association, makes this offending particularly serious offending of its type.
Walker's lawyer Kerry Tustin says her client acknowledges the considerable pain he's caused the Patterson family.
The facts themselves reflect badly, of course, on Mr Walker. They show the lack of insight he had that night. It shows the inherent problems of being involved in a gang environment and coupling with that a propensity to use violence and an abuse of methamphetamine.
Justice Peters told Walker that while a total of 8 people played different roles in Mitchell's death, he was there for every part of it.
Whatever Mr Patterson may have done, nothing could possibly justify anyone, let alone several grown men setting out like vigilantes to kidnap him and take him to Wilson's address. I accept it was not part of the plan to kill Mr Patterson, but even on the best scenario, it was never going to end well for Mr Patterson.
Justice Peters accepted that Walker had been shocked by Mr Patterson's death and that he was remorseful. 5 people have now been sentenced for their part in the death and another 3 await sentencing in September. In Hamilton for Checkpoint, call Andrew McRae-Tene.
It's 26.5 minutes past 5. The Kaitiaki or Guardians of a Maunga north of Auckland say a controversial shooting club should never have been allowed to operate there because the land is wahi tapu or sacred. Auckland Shooting Club, north of Kaukupakupa, is embroiled in a bitter fight with the neighbouring meditation centre and locals as well over its right to operate. And now the hapu, Ngāti Rongo, is joining the fray and wants to have the land recognised as a site of cultural significance, which could potentially affect any future activities on the land. Joanna Mackenzie filed this report.
We're standing close to the peak of Maunga, Tuirangi, and we're looking east along the very ridges that our ancestors traversed.
Ngāti Rongo Kaumatua, William Kapea, walks on his hapu's maunga, describing what he sees.
They were an intricate web of traffic, foot traffic, that were important for the survival of us as an iwi. We fish both coasts.
The maunga is very important for his hapu, as it's what they first saw when they arrived in the Kaipara harbour. Mr Kapea says it's the springs that are wahi tapu and make this area so special.
We know for a fact that one of the springs up here was used for the bathing of warriors before and after a battle. And they were significant, and that's why this is so important to us, because the tapu associated with that particular area is sacred.
William Kapea says the hapu has no issue with the gun club, but a spiritual area like Tuhirangi is simply not an appropriate place to have a shooting range. He's so concerned he's held a meeting at the maunga with the police's Māori liaison officers to explain what the site means to his hapu.
It's not that we're opposed to the gun club, we're opposed to the effects of tapu when you associate that activity where these people are ignorant to what's there.
The hapu has made a nomination to Auckland Council's heritage team to recognise the site as culturally significant, but it's been told the application must come from its iwi. Manager of Heritage at the council, Noel Reardon, says the process is lengthy and far from straightforward.
Plan change is probably a 1.5-year long process. So this is not a quick fix. This is going to be slow, methodical. It will be, the council will ensure it gets done right, because what you're doing is you're putting controls on private landowners, so it has to be done right, it has to be done in consultation with landowners, and it has to recognise the mana whenua values.
The unitary plan so far has 75 sites scheduled as being of cultural significance, and another 40 are soon to be added. Even so, Mr Reardon says that barely scratches the surface of Auckland.
There are tens of thousands of sites that will have those sorts of values, and we will have lost tens of thousands because over the period of centuries, the knowledge of those sites is lost. But there's only 75 sites scheduled in the unitary plan. There's a lot more sites out there than there are sites that are protected.
But he says going through the process can be meaningful for mana whenua and landowners.
I've been on site where the landowner has wanted to urbanise an area, and mana whenua have said this is the significance of this place to us, and the landowner has turned around and said, I always wondered why I felt the way I did when I was walking over this area of land. That landowner in particular has changed his plans as a result.
RNZ contacted Raymond O'Brien, one of the owners of the land where the gun club is based, but he didn't want to speak on the record. Neighbours who live next to the club say shooting has reduced in the last month since the wintry weather set in and the police revoked the club's pistol licence. I Tamaki Makoto for Checkpoint, ko Joanna Mackenzie Tēnei.
It's 5:30 on Checkpoint on RNZ National. Coming up on the program, the acting Prime Minister Kelvin Davis says Jacinda Ardern should not go to Ihumātao. A Christchurch family asks whether $126,000 will be enough to pay for repairs to their on-sold home. A 91-year-old travels from Manawatu to Parliament to present a petition calling for the reopening of the Manawatu Gorge, and US intelligence services claims Hamza bin Laden, the son of Osama, is dead. We'd love your feedback. Get in touch, 2101 on the text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We're on Facebook as well, Checkpoint, or get in touch on email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But before all that, Paul Brennan is here for the headlines.
Thank you, Alex. The Education Minister says the government's sweeping changes to polytechnics are needed because too few people are in training and vocational education is too complex. The government is spending $200 million on overhauling polytechnics, creating a single national institute catering for 100,000 students. The new institute will take over responsibility for apprenticeships and replace industry training organisations with workforce councils. The Telecommunications Users Association says it's been taken by surprise with Vodafone's jump on Spark and rolling out the first 5G mobile network. Vodafone has announced today it will launch 5G in Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch and Queenstown, spending tens of millions transitioning 120 cell sites to 5G and upgrading 400 of its 4G sites. Ahapu, north of Copper, says a gun club should not have been allowed on its maunga because the land is wahitapu. Auckland Shooting Club has already been at loggerheads with a neighbouring mediation centre and locals over its right to operate. Ngāti Rango Kaumatua is supporting the mediation centre and wants the land recognised as a site of cultural significance. MedSafe is warning people against using two weight loss products, Go Lean Detox and Go Detox, which contain prescription drugs. ESR found the products contain undeclared prescription medicines which are no longer used in this country, one due to increased risk of heart attacks and strokes. A dogs team has found no evidence of people being caught up in an avalanche near Queenstown early this afternoon. The specialist rescue dogs were flown into the site near the Remarkables ski field after an avalanche on the gully opposite the access road. Ski area manager Ross Lawrence says the Remarkables ski patrol searched the area and are confident no one was caught up. A 91-year-old man has travelled from rural Manawatu to Parliament to present his petition calling for the reopening of the Manawatu Gorge, which has been closed since 2017 after multiple slips. Noni Sandilands has collected 863 signatures by hand because he doesn't have a computer. And those are the headlines.
Thanks very much, Paul. And Madison Reedy joins us for business. How are you this evening?
I'm good. It's been a busy day, Alex.
You have been busy. You've been reporting on Vodafone and 5G, which we're going to get by Christmas, apparently.
Yes, you are.
It's going to
we
cost
live in
us,
Auckland, so we will, but not everyone will.
Oh, there you go.
You might have to pay quite a bit for it too.
And you've got to buy a new phone.
Probably too.
But they're not the only company making announcements today. The Warehouse going online.
Yes, it is. The Warehouse Group announced today as well. They were not the only company making announcements. Excuse me. The Warehouse has announced this new online shopping platform, and it's going to be called The Market. Now, the Warehouse obviously owns The Warehouse, as well as Warehouse Stationery, Noel Leeming, and also Torpedo 7, as well as the Daily Deal website. You may not have known, called oneday.co.nz. But The Market, this platform, will offer 1,500 new brands. And in total, it will sell 1 million products when it launches. It will include the local brands like Karen Walker, World, and the men's clothing brand Barker's. But it'll also include international brands like the Australian activewear brand P Nation, the Australian women's workwear brand Q, and also the beachwear brand Billabong, as well as others like Cotton On. Now, the Warehouse Group says that they're going to spend $12 million on this, and it is going to be operated as a separate subsidiary to the Warehouse. It'll have its own board, and it's also its own head office in central Auckland. Although it's the Warehouse stores will be used as a click and collect station. So if you buy something on the market, you can go to your local warehouse and actually pick up your item that you've bought online. Now, some may say that this is possibly a bit too late for the Warehouse to be jumping on the e-commerce train, but the Warehouse doesn't think that. They say that actually New Zealanders only spend 9% of their total retail spend online at the moment, compared to, say, the Brits, who spend 18%, so double what we do online. So the Warehouse Group thinks that the e-commerce trend is only really just beginning, and that they're going to take a good slice of it.
Right, and then the market is kind of like a different market in a sense from what you get at the Warehouse stores, where you're likely just to sort of drive in, drop by, pick up a few goods. But here you're going online to shop for some of those better known brands.
Yeah, exactly. It won't necessarily be the cheaper brands. I mean, Karen Walker and World. I mean, gosh, I think a jacket at World can sometimes top $1,000. Is certainly out of my pay bracket. But yes, certainly not just the kind of more cheaper end items that are typically sold at your red shed at the moment.
Right. Okay, and the US Federal Reserve, we talked about them last night, they took the plunge.
They did take the plunge.
Didn't plunge, though.
Didn't plunge, put their toes in the water for the first time in a decade. So the United States Federal Reserve came out around 6 a.m. this morning and announced that they were cutting the United States economy's interest rates. They took a 25 basis point cut, so not the whopping 50 basis point cut that some economists reckon that they might have. Now, that is quite interesting that they've done that, though, given that this is the first interest rate cut in a decade. The Federal Reserve in the United States has been hiking interest rates ever since the global financial crisis hit in 2008, so a pretty significant move here. Now, the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, said that they cut interest rates this time around because of things like trade uncertainty with the US-China trade war at the moment, also muted inflation in the United States economy, slower job growth too, and business investment falling, but he wasn't so pessimistic in his outlook. He does think that the United States economy is on a pretty good footing, that it's in a, quote, favourable position, and he also says that the trade tensions have gone from what was a boil and they've reduced down to a simmer. So not all bad news there, despite the cut.
Right, okay, and update us on the markets. What happened today?
The NZX Top 50 Index closed up just 3 points tonight to close at 10,860 points. The New Zealand dollar, that's buying at 65.5 US cents, 95.7 to the Australian, and 54 British pence.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. Madison Reedy there with the latest in the business world, and it's 22 and a half minutes to 6. A Christchurch family is worried they'll be left in the lurch after a dispute about how much it will cost to fix their cold, cracked, earthquake-damaged home. It comes just weeks before an on-sold test case begins at the High Court. Now, the government hopes the test case will clarify who is liable for earthquake repairs for properties purchased after the earthquakes and where botched repairs have resulted in repair costs of far more than the current maximum $115,000 EQC cap. EQC and Southern Response believe Jody Devine's Wainoni property can be fixed for what it was insured for by the previous owner when the first Canterbury earthquake struck. But as Logan Church explains, Jody believes it will cost much, much more.
Jody Devine's family purchased this 3-bedroom Wainoni home in 2015 for $320,000.
We were living in a rental with Madeline, who was 21 months at the time, so we decided it was time to go buy something. The week that we bought it, we put the offer in. We also found out that we were pregnant with Evelyn, which was really exciting for us. So 6 weeks later, we moved in.
It got the big tick from EQC. Everything was fixed after the Canterbury earthquakes of 2010 and 2011. But like hundreds of other Christchurch properties, it wasn't.
When I was vacuuming, I noticed bumps, and it just seemed to be moving. We thought that we could move in. This is our family home. We could live in it. It was repaired. We could get on painting the walls, making it a home. But we found that we can't because we're stuck with a policy from 2010.
Come the 5.7 magnitude Valentine's Day earthquake of 2016, Jodie says the property suffered major damage. Cracks in concrete, roof damage, and cracks in the window frames. Jodie's partner Scott showed me their front door.
All the framing's all pulled away. You know, you can see it sort of, all the eaves are starting to drop off. You know, the door doesn't shut properly most of the time. You've got to sort of force it in. It'll free up at times as well. But, you know, the more shakes we have, the difference is noticeable.
So you've noticed this getting worse and worse?
Yeah. I mean, the drafts that are getting in, mate. It's just phenomenal. You know, we go through a lot of wood because the house is constantly cooling off because of the amount of drafts around.
It's cold.
Yeah, and the house is fully insulated, so it should be a lot warmer than it is.
In the kitchen, the floor is very uneven.
Well, no, they're not level. There's a pile here that's popped up out of the ground that happened in the Valentine's quake because I'd walked through the house and I noticed it immediately while standing in the kitchen. The vinyl started to rip. I'm assuming, or guessing it's something to do with the pile because the pile has popped up out of the ground.
Southern Response initially offered Jodie about $18,000 to fix the property. That was later upped to $126,000, the exact value of the home's insurance policy in 2010 when the Canterbury earthquakes began. Because Jodie didn't have an insurance policy on the property at the time of the 2010-11 quakes, she isn't entitled to the $320,000 she insured it for in 2015, and she's concerned the $126,000 won't be anywhere near enough.
So Southern Response received our engineer's report, they reviewed it. They have not noted the fact that there's the engineering design, they've just completely ignored that. They've ignored the cracks on the walls. They've also ignored the missing purlin in the roof cavity from when EQC repaired the house. They've missed, the fact that we've got a barrier that's popped up in the hallway and there's vinyl there that will need replacing.
And what this mum of two wants is simple.
To be able to start fixing our house and for it to get repaired, for them to give us the all go, and also to stop new homeowners buying a home, because when people come to me and, you know, they buy a house and they say it's EQC repaired, I want to get excited for them. It's their first home, but after what we've been through, I wouldn't wish this on anyone.
Jodie and Scott want enough money to repair their home, or a managed repair without a cap of $126,000. Checkpoint approached EQC and Southern Response for comment. They put up EQC's Deputy Chief Executive Renee Walker to speak on behalf of both organisations. She confirms that some initial repairs need to be re-repaired. 8 piles are currently not compliant. But Ms Walker is confident everything can be fixed for the current offer on the table, and she says she hasn't received information that suggests otherwise.
The offer that's been made to Jodie and Scott is for $126,000, or, as I say, we will complete the repair for them.
Jodie has made it very clear to us she wants her house fixed. So what happens if repairs go over that costed amount, which is all that Jodie understands she is entitled to?
We believe that the repair can actually be done for the $126,000, so that's why we're happy to go with either option. We do think that that more than covers the work that needs to be done. So, but yes, if it increased past that value on the agreed scope, then that cost would be ours once we start the repair. What we've discussed is the next step is for GCCRS, Southern Response, ourselves and Jodie and Scott to sit down and just work through all of the options that are available and decide on the best one for them.
Jodie has already asked for that meeting to take place between EQC, Southern Response and the Greater Christchurch Claims Resolution Service. She is waiting for their response. The current offer on the table expires next Friday. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Coming up to 16 minutes to 6, United States intelligence officials say the son of the late al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden has died. Hamza bin Laden had made specific threats against the US and was seen as an eventual leader of al-Qaeda. The US had offered $1 million in reward for information on his whereabouts. Now, it's not known what role the US has played in the death or even when he died. The ABC's Rachel Mealy reports.
Footage of Hamza bin Laden's wedding was released by US officials after his father Osama bin Laden was killed in Pakistan in 2011. It shows a smiling groom who appears to be in his early 20s, surrounded by other male friends sitting down to eat. The footage was found on a computer hard drive seized by the US at the bin Laden compound. Today, US intelligence officials say they believe Hamza bin Laden is dead. US President Donald Trump wouldn't be drawn.
I don't want to comment on it.
Intelligence sources have told the US TV network CBS that they believe Hamza bin Laden died in a military operation, although he was not the target and was not known to be at the location. The information about his death was revealed to US intelligence officers later.
Officials say US intelligence monitored conversations among al-Qaeda members about whether they should try to keep Hamza's death a secret or acknowledge it and celebrate him as a martyr.
It's been 8 years since Osama bin Laden was killed, and al-Qaeda doesn't pose the same threat it once did. Roger Shanahan is a research fellow at the Lowy Institute. He says taking Hamza bin Laden out of the mix makes it harder for the terrorist organisation to regroup down the track.
What it does for al-Qaeda is takes away one of the potential future charismatic leaders for them. They're going to have to look at who they can put forward as a next generation leader, because the kind of name cachet that he brought with it had the potential to attract supporters simply based on that name. If you don't have that anymore, then you've got to reassess how you're going to attract the new generation of recruits to you.
US officials haven't confirmed when or where Hamza was killed, but commentators suggest it was likely to have been in Afghanistan or Pakistan. Roger Shanahan says it's not clear why the US has released the information now, but it plays well for its own PR in the war on terror.
It's difficult to tell what role the US had in it, but the fact that the US is releasing the information probably says that they had some role. So you would definitely have to say that yes, it's another tactical success in the long war against radicalism.
Roger Shanahan, Research Fellow at the Lowy Institute in Sydney, ending that report by the ABC's Rachel Mealy. And just coming up to 13 minutes to 6, we're staying with the United States. The former Vice President Joe Biden has come under fire from his fellow Democratic presidential hopefuls, though that's no surprise because they're all debating each other at the moment. This is the second round of a televised debate in Detroit. The debate field included strong challengers like Kamala Harris and Cory Booker, both hoping to replace him as the frontrunner. During the at times brutal encounter, Joe Biden defended himself along two different lines of attack. Critiques from Kamala Harris that his policy proposals aren't progressive enough, and attacks from Cory Booker on his record, including a controversial crime bill that he supported way back in 1994. CNN's Karin Kafer reports.
Candidates lining the debate stage making history. Diversity on full display as equal numbers of white and non-white candidates take the stage.
Mr. President, this is America. And we are strong and great because of this diversity, Mr. President.
Former Vice President Joe Biden standing front and center in between Cory Booker and Kamala Harris, with whom he clashed in Miami. Right off the bat, Harris and Biden sparred on health care.
You can't beat President Trump with double talk on this plan.
Unfortunately, Vice President Biden, you're just simply inaccurate. For a Democrat to be running for president with a plan that does not cover everyone, I think is without excuse.
Senators Harris and Booker recently escalated their attacks on Biden's record on criminal justice and issues related to race as they try to attract support, particularly among black voters, where Biden still holds an advantage.
You are trying to shift the view from what you created. There are people right now in prison for life for drug offenses because you stood up and used that tough on crime, phony rhetoric that got a lot of people elected, but destroyed communities like mine. This isn't about the past, sir. This is about the present right now. The person who's enjoying this debate most right now is Donald Trump.
Already, half of the candidates here have met at least one of the qualifications for participating in the next debate. Those in the back of the pack focusing on the frontrunner to stand out.
Joe Biden told wealthy donors that nothing fundamentally would change if he were president. Kamala Harris said she's not trying to restructure society. Well, I am.
Democratic candidate Bill de Blasio, who's also Mayor of New York, ending that report from CNN on the wide field of candidates for the Democratic primary. It's 11 minutes to 6. I'm Alex Perrottet. You're with Checkpoint and RNZ National. Keen for your feedback? Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. There's a fair bit coming on the government's plan for the mega merge of all those polytechnics. We'll see if we can get to some of that before the news at 6. The government's being told the new national water regulator will need teeth if it's to be effective in delivering on its promise to clean up New Zealand's drinking water. The government is establishing a regulator to oversee the enforcement of high drinking water standards to prevent a repeat of the contamination of Havelock North's water supply 3 years ago. As a result, local government would no longer have the final say on safe drinking water. Our Christchurch reporter Nicholas Poynton filed this report.
Christchurch has faced its own issues with drinking water in recent years, as officials have reported dangerously high levels of nitrates in drinking supplies. Canterbury Public Health physician Dr Alistair Humphrey says the intensification of farming has led to runoff that has polluted drinking water sources. He supports the new water regulatory body because the Christchurch Regional Council has not had much success protecting source water.
To date, they don't appear to have had much success. So perhaps a national water regulator, if it was given responsibility and teeth to deal with source water protection, would do better. But you'd need to look into the detail there.
Dr Humphrey says the watchdog will need to be granted significant power so that it can be effective.
There are parts of the country which ultimately have had to limit dairy cattle simply as the only way of reducing nitrates, and that's something that a regulator should have the power to do if it considers that intensified farming is causing a problem to source water.
On the streets of Christchurch today, there was a mixed reaction to the regulatory body. One local, Murray Cullen, saw both the pros and the cons of a national authority for the city's drinking water. He agrees with the proposal in principle, but says monitoring drinking water is a complex issue and it should not be up to central government to take responsibility.
I mean, ECAN has a huge responsibility. The farming community, well, I shouldn't bag the farming community, but the community in the wider Canterbury Plains that feeds all the nitrates and other stuff into our aquifers have a responsibility. So it's not just, central government that should be regulating it.
Marie, who did not want her last name to be used, says urban councils with large ratepayer bases already had the resources to look after themselves. She could not be sure whether a national authority would in fact make a difference.
Yes and no. For some councils who have a small ratepayer base in a very large area, then yes, it would help them. But for bigger councils, no. So like Auckland City, Christchurch, perhaps Invercargill, Dunedin, the bigger centres, I think they have a larger ratepayer base that they can sort out their own systems. But I still think there needs to be a national standard for water.
Alan Dufell supported the government's decision to take a national approach to monitoring high drinking water standards. Mr Dufell says he thought the council was too divided to take a unified approach.
Well, the problems that we have at the moment is you get little factions of the council fighting and squabbling over who's going to get their own way. When you put it to central government, a lot of that gets ironed out beforehand, and you don't get so much effect from the small pressure groups.
Chlorination of water supplies could become mandatory under the new regulator, unless officials can prove their water is safe. Mr Dufell downplayed any concerns around chlorination.
It's a reality if you don't keep the water supply clean. I lived in Ashburton for 45 years, where it's always chlorinated. Hadn't done me any harm. Didn't enjoy the chlorine sometimes, but it's one of those things that happens. If you have a water supply like they have, where it is susceptible to infection getting into it, then you're stuck with it, aren't you?
However, for some Cantabrians, chlorination of the city's water supply was no laughing matter. Trent Pepe was among those who says the chemical process had caused major issues.
The chlorination is just causing problems right through to hot water cylinders. I mean, if you're not servicing those regularly, you're going to have problems with those starting to leak because the chlorine's affecting all those older cylinders and those sorts of things. So probably not. Like, the consensus around Christchurch is they want their water back the way it was.
The Water Services Bill will be introduced before the end of the year and will lay out the details of the policy in full. The bill is expected to come into effect in the middle of next year, and water suppliers will have up to 5 years to meet the new regulations. For Checkpoint, Nicholas Poynton.
It's 5.5 minutes to 6. Well, the political question of the week is, should the Prime Minister go to Ihumātao on her return from Tokelau? Well, the Acting Prime Minister Kelvin Davis says no, and his coalition colleagues agree with him. Mr Davis says there are Māori ministers working on resolving the dispute at Ihumātao, and they're doing a good job. Employment Minister Willie Jackson is one of those ministers, and he agrees the Prime Minister should not go, as does the Regional Economic Development Minister Shane Jones. Kelvin Davis spoke to reporters at Parliament this afternoon, where he denied Ms Ardern was snubbing the protesters.
And we'll engage when the locals want us to, but I don't think the Prime Minister should go there.
Why is that?
Oh, because we've got Māori ministers who are actually working on the issue, so we don't want to overcomplicate the situation.
Protesters have asked the Prime Minister to come and meet with them.
Yeah, but I think that the Māori ministers are doing the job.
So should she just completely ignore what's going on there?
No, she's not completely ignoring them. That's a silly thing to say, but we have had Māori ministers that have been working on the situation for the week, and I'm totally confident in the job that they've been doing, in particular Nanaia Mahuta, Peeni Henare, Willie Jackson.
Why shouldn't she go?
Because the Māori ministers have been doing the job.
Is it a snub?
No, of course it's not.
Would it escalate the issue a little bit if she was there?
Look, it's a very complex situation, and like I say, let's not try and complicate it further. There's still work to be done. We don't want to undermine any sort of work that's been done or anything that's going on, the progress that's been going on.
Do you not think the situation there deserves the attention of the Prime Minister?
The Prime Minister is no doubt been briefed while she's been away as to what's going on, and she's confident in the job that the ministers are doing.
That was Acting Prime Minister Kelvin Davis talking to reporters at Parliament this afternoon. It's 4 minutes to 6. A 91-year-old man travelled from rural Manawatu to Parliament today to present his petition calling for the reopening of the Manawatu Gorge. Noni Sanderlands from Colleton, who's been travelling the road for 70 years, has collected 863 signatures by hand because he doesn't have a computer. Mr Sanderlands spoke to our reporter Charlotte Cook about why he cares about the road that's been closed since 2017 due to multiple slips.
It's always been important to me as my travelling in my youth. I used to travel through to Paeatua in my courting days, where I actually went to Paeatua to meet my wife, or future wife. My wife is in a rest home at the moment and has been for 2.5 years. We're lucky enough this year to get a letter from the Queen. We've been married 70 years. It's an honour. We even got one from our local MP, Ian McKelvey.
It's pretty special. And if this road wasn't there, this might not have ever been the love story that you've got.
Absolutely. Where there's a will, there's a way. And I'm quite sure that if the powers that be like to listen to the people, there is a will, there is a way, and it should be done.
You said you had no computer.
No, I have no computer. Got my 863 signatures by personally seeking it out. Had I had a computer and got email, I think everybody who drives a car or a truck would have signed for the gorge to be opened. It's unbelievable that the powers that be won't open it at the moment.
So on a very community level, you're hearing face to face what the real issues are.
That's right, absolutely. I'm hearing that the traffic through Ashurst itself, people are sick and tired of the noise and then the amount of traffic that's going through. They say there are 5,000 vehicles going through Ashurst every day. 3,000 of those are cars alone, which could easily go through the gorge if they would open it. Not for big trucks, they're far too heavy.
How hard has it been collating all of these, nearly 1,000 signatures, without a computer? What's your process?
No, I had some friends I'd take the card around and leave them at people's places, and I had a lot of friends and they were adamant, and a lot of them were business people, and they said that their businesses were suffering because of it.
How long have you been writing the petition for?
I started, my first letter was when the gorge first was closed, and I wrote to the papers saying that I believed it could be opened and should be opened, but nobody was listening.
So now you're at the big house fighting for it here.
I am, and I hope that my voice will be heard, but if it isn't, at least I have tried, and I hope that people will respect that.
Now, that was 91-year-old Noni Sanderlands, who travelled from Manawatu to present a petition to Parliament today calling for the old Manawatu Gorge road to be opened. Spoke very passionately. The Transport Agency is planning to build a new road by 2024, which will run north of the gorge. That's close to the old Saddle Road. Now, we will talk to Dave Guerin, the editor of Tertiary Insight, after 6 p.m, and hopefully we'll also get to some of your feedback, which has been streaming in on the merging of the Polytechs, the 16 Polytechs into one mega merge. We'll speak more after 6.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. I'm Paul Brennan. The government has put aside $200 million for its overhaul of apprenticeships and polytechnics. Today it announced changes including merging the 16 polytechnics into a single national institute with more than 100,000 students. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The new institute will be created in April and will also take over responsibility for on-the-job training such as apprenticeships. That means the end for industry training organisations, which will be replaced by new workforce councils. The councils will not oversee workplace training, but they will have the power to veto courses that don't meet industry requirements. The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, says the changes are needed because too many polytechnics are making deficits, too few people are in training, and the vocational education system is too complex. Ko John Gerritsen, TNA.
Invercargill leaders are vowing to fight the merger. Carla Forbes of Stand Up for SIT told Checkpoint there are widespread fears the merger will kill off the successes of the Southland region. She says the Southland Institute of Technology is one of the key economic drivers to Southland, so a merger would have negative downstream effects on businesses and the community.
Pulling that into one giant sort of organisation is going to, I guess, take away from that unique success model we have and take such a lot away from our community here, but more than financially through the diversity of all of those students coming here. It's really just going to shrink the benefit that it offers Southland.
Stand Up for SIT campaign director Carla Forbes. A high-profile sportsman connected to an international drug syndicate may take his fight to keep his name secret to the Supreme Court. He was named during the trial of a trio found guilty of importing methamphetamine from California in the High Court at Auckland. Annika Smith reports.
At trial, the presiding judge, Justice Downs, refused to grant the man name suppression, but his lawyer, Mike Heron QC, indicated he'd appeal against the decision. The Court of Appeal heard the case last month and issued its decision today, dismissing the appeal and declining name suppression. It noted restrictions on the publication of information about a trial should be kept in only very special circumstances. The sportsman has until Tuesday afternoon to seek leave to appeal the decision to the Supreme Court. If he does not, his name suppression will lapse on Thursday. Ko Annika Smith aho.
Hamza bin Laden, the son of former al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, is reported to have been killed in a military strike. US media are quoting intelligence sources, although the Pentagon has not made an official statement. The BBC's Chris Buckler reports.
The United States had offered $1 million for information that led to the capture of Hamza bin Laden, but they now believe he's dead, killed in a military operation. It's thought he wasn't the target of the strike and that the US only learned of his death because of intercepted communications between members of al-Qaeda. His father, Osama bin Laden, was responsible for the September 11th terror attacks that resulted in the murders of almost 3,000 people. And in letters, he had boasted of grooming his son as his successor.
Chris Buckler in Washington. A specialist dog team hasn't found any evidence of people being caught up in an avalanche near Queenstown. The avalanche rescue dogs were flown into the site of the 150-metre-long, 95-centimetre deep avalanche near the Remarkable ski field this afternoon. The ski area manager, Ross Lawrence, says the Remarkable ski patrol searched the area immediately and is confident no one was caught up. He says the dog team found nothing in a final 2 sweeps of Scarpa Run. Mr. Lawrence says people heading outside the ski area boundary need to be aware of the risk of avalanches and always have the right equipment with them. The medicines regulator is warning people against using 2 weight loss products because they contain prescription drugs. MedSafe says people who have been taking Go Lean Detox and Go Detox should stop and return the products to the supplier or dispose of them safely. The products have been tested by ESR and the prescription medicines they contain aren't declared on the label. One has previously been withdrawn from the New Zealand market because of an increased risk of heart attacks and strokes associated with it. The other has a known laxative effect and is no longer used in medicines here. MedSafe says there's been 1 report of a person experiencing side effects. A 91-year-old man travelled from rural Manawatu to Parliament today to present his petition calling for the reopening of the Manawatu Gorge. Noni Sandilands from Polytechnic has been travelling the road for 70 years, has collected 863 signatures by hand because he doesn't have a computer. The road has been closed since 2017 after multiple slips, forcing drivers to take alternative routes until a new road is built. Mr. Sandilands says the gorge is special to him, but it also has a practical purpose.
In my youth, I used to travel through to Polytechnic in my courting days, where I went to meet my wife, or future wife. For 145 years, the gorge has been the main access from the west coast to the east coast.
Sandilands says he thinks the Transport Agency won't fix the gorge because it could jeopardise funding for the new road. It's 4 minutes past 6. The Australia captain, Tim Payne, has scoffed at suggestions Edgbaston is the most intimidating ground in Test cricket. Australia start their defence of the Ashes against England tonight with the first match at the Birmingham ground. England haven't lost a home Ashes series in 18 years and haven't lost to any side at Edgbaston in the past 11. However, Payne says his side can play anywhere.
Doesn't matter if we played Edgbaston, the Gabba or on the Moon. We think our best cricket is good enough, and the Edgbaston pitch or the Edgbaston crowd or the grandstand or whatever it is certainly won't play a part in deciding this Test match.
Is there a more intimidating ground in world cricket
than this? I could name you 15.
Australia hold the Ashes after winning the 2017-18 series in Australia 4-0. The former Phoenix player Suppression Singh has scored his first goal for his new club Bayern Munich, but they were beaten in a penalty shootout by Tottenham Hotspur in a pre-season tournament. Singh scored in the shootout that decided the Audi Cup in Munich. The 20-year-old made his first start for the Bayern first team and played the entire match. The game finished 2-2, with Spurs winning the shootout 8-7. And the Tall Blacks coach, Paul Henare, says his players need to show more than skill in this week's final selection camp in Auckland. 23 players are in camp, which will be trimmed to 14 for their build-up trip to Japan, and then to 12 for the Basketball World Cup in China at the end of the month. Henare says other than just impressing on the court, the players have to show that they can put the team first. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, our cultural ambassador, Mona Lynn Cortot, marks the passing of João Gilberto with a selection of bossa nova delights. Our changing world meets a cross-dressing professor who's been studying themselves, if that's the right word. And our overseas correspondent, Patrick Phelps, talks about his tour of Ouija country in Western China. Lots of police and soldiers there. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
A short forecast now from Met Service through to midnight tomorrow Friday, and remember, warnings and watches are in place for severe westerly gales in many parts of the country tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine today, scattered rain tomorrow. Waited Upper and Wellington, occasional showers. For the rest of the North Island, occasional showers, some with hail. Snow above 500 metres in southern and central areas. Squally thunderstorms are possible from Manawatu southwards tomorrow afternoon. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, cloudy periods, isolated showers. Buller and Westland, fine showers tomorrow, some with hail and squally thunderstorms. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, isolated showers. Rain developing in Fiordland this evening, spreading elsewhere tomorrow. Snow to 500 metres, isolated thunderstorms and severe southwesterly gales. Heavy snow is possible above 700 metres. At the Chatham Islands, periods of rain, possibly heavy. It's 6:07.
Thanks very much, Paul. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Alex Perrottet. Turning now to the massive shake-up of polytechnics and industry training. Next year, the nation's 16 polytechnics will be rolled into a single super institute with more than 100,000 students and responsibility for nearly all of the country's on-the-job training. Industry training organisations that oversee the apprenticeship system will also go, but their replacements, workforce development councils, will be able to veto courses that don't come up to scratch. Now, Dave Guerin is the editor of Tertiary Insight and joins me now. Good evening to you, Dave.
Good evening. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Look, take us back a little bit and let's address the problem here, because some people might be arguing that this is a solution looking for a problem.
Well, there are two problems here, really. One is the long-term one is that we have skill shortages in New Zealand. Regardless of the best efforts of everyone in the system at the moment, we still have them, and they need to be solved. And there's various groups that benefit more or less from tertiary education. So there's all sorts of things like that need to be solved. The other problem is that polytechnics finances were looking pretty bad. Some of them had some management problems, but across the board, they just didn't have enough money to make the books balance. And so the bigger driver of these reforms is really the financial position of polytechnics.
Yes, so I guess we heard earlier from the Southern Institute of Technology saying that it's got more to lose than to gain. Does this, in your opinion, does this big rolling into one even everyone out?
Well, I think it'll take a long time to even everyone out, but it will to an extent. But look, there's problems that enrolments went down. Some people didn't manage their polytechnics that well, but the other problem is that the funding rates just haven't changed in a long time. So regardless of anything else, the government's just going to end up pumping more money in order to make things work, because at the bottom of it all, there isn't enough funding in there for these organisations to work at the moment. And that's what the government's found. With the announcement today, it's announced these big changes, but underlying it all, it says that it's going to roughly double the amount of money that it's committing to the reforms that it originally talked about.
OK, now rolling them all into one is going to obviously centralise everything and give the minister more power. He's actually saying that it will give industry more power because they will have the power to limit some courses where there are just not places to fill. I mean, that sounds very pragmatic, rather than people lining up and doing courses that they just like the sound of, or that universities and polytechnics offer because they might have the staff with the expertise to teach them. We're hopefully going to get people coming out of these institutes that can go straight into jobs. So it sounds good.
Yes, and a lot of industry groups are very supportive of that. Some industry groups are upset about other things in these reforms, but across the board, they're pretty supportive of the idea that industry will have more say about where resources go and which programs are funded and which are not. And there certainly are issues there, and there'll be a lot of employer support for that change. Other things within the reforms are, there'll be less support for.
Now, Dave, like a lot of the things this government is doing, it's big, it's aspirational, and of course it takes a long time for, I guess, the public to test whether it's been a success or not. They're saying that, I guess what we're going to see in the next couple of years is just a warm-up or preparation for the whole policy to take place. So I don't know, when do you think it's going to be a good time to judge the success or failure of this policy?
Oh, probably 4 or 5 years. And the reason behind that is that they're focusing, the next year or two will be almost entirely focused on these structural changes. Working people into new organisations, shifting people across organisations, coming up with new funding systems and everything else. I can't see many substantive changes until at least 2021. And even then, you're going to take quite a while to work things in and to really see a change out of that. And new qualifications will take years to develop and then to get in place and have people graduate from them. So there's going to be a lot of transitional pain and structural change and all the rest. And probably 3, 4, 5 years until you see whether this has actually made a difference or not. And part of the problem, too, is that because there's going to be so much change in organisations and staff and jobs and all the rest, IT systems, is that it will take quite a while for people to get down to saying, well, how are we going to improve skill shortages in construction or skill shortages in the primary sector? People are going to be distracted from those bigger issues by the major structural change.
And it does sound similar to what they did in New South Wales across the ditch with the TAFE idea of bringing them all into one. I don't know how well that's gone in some areas, but financially I think they've lost more than $200 million just last year. I mean, I don't know what the causes of that loss are. Do you subscribe to the idea that maybe some of those that have real good links to the grassroots, such as the one down south, the Southern Institute of Technology, might be able to find a way to be left out of this? Or is it an all-or-nothing proposal?
I think it's an all-or-nothing proposal. I mean, I can see the benefits of having a distributed system like we do in New Zealand with a lot of different polytechnics, and I can also see there's advantages in the New South Wales system. Now, if you want to pick out, the minister's picked out elements that he likes in the New South Wales system that he doesn't like in the New Zealand system. Other people go the other way. You can achieve improvements in vocational education either way. It really depends on how good the implementation is.
Thanks very much. Dave Guerin there, Tertiary Insight editor, with a bit of insight there, of course, into what will happen. It'll be a long time, he says, before we can judge it. 4 or 5 years to roll out properly. 16 polytechs coming into one. It's coming up to 6:15 across the Tasman now, and the son of United States President Donald Trump has weighed in on Australian domestic affairs, labelling calls to bar a controversial right-wing activist from entering the country as insanity. Australia's Labor opposition has called on the Morrison government to deny a visa to former Breitbart editor-in-chief Raheem Kassam, who intends to visit Australia to speak at the Conservative Political Action Conference being held in Sydney next week. Labor has described him as a career bigot who spreads hate speech. The ABC's Nick Grimm has more.
Donald Trump Jr. is looking at Australia and seeing madness. At least that's his take on the controversy surrounding Raheem Kassam, tweeting to his followers,
"We have big tech constantly trying to silence conservatives, and now one of the major political parties in Australia is trying to silence Raheem Kassam because of his conservative views. The insanity needs to stop."
Raheem Kassam is a British right-winger and a vocal Brexiteer. A former Breitbart news editor, he's described the Quran as fundamentally evil.
Mr. Kassam has an extensive history of vilifying people on the grounds of their race, religion...
And as Labor's Shadow Home Affairs Minister Christina Keneally told the Senate this week, that's not the least of it.
Mr. Kassam has campaigned for, quote, limited migration against what he describes as, quote, large-scale Muslim immigration.
Raheem Kassam has also gained notoriety for a tasteless tweet about Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, who had suffered a miscarriage.
Mr. Kassam tweeted, "Can someone just, tape Nicola Sturgeon's mouth shut and her legs so she can't reproduce?"
While he reportedly now regrets that tweet, revulsion with Raheem Kassam's views extend across the parliamentary chamber. Here's the leader of the government in the Senate, Matthias Cormann.
Mr. President, well, the comments that Senator Keneally just quoted are disgraceful and highly objectionable and completely outrageous comments that, of course, I entirely abhor, and I'm sure anybody in this Senate chamber abhors.
But the government is also resisting Labor's calls to deny Raheem Kassam a visa. That's despite previously refusing entry to the country for controversial figures such as WikiLeaks whistleblower Chelsea Manning, right-wing commentator Milo Yiannopoulos and English conspiracy theorist David Icke. The Morrison government also has no problem with Liberal MPs like Craig Kelly appearing on the same platform with Raheem Kassam. Next week, they're both set to speak at the Conservative Political Action Conference being held in Sydney, alongside figures including UK Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage, former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott and One Nation's Mark Latham. Labor is calling the event a talkfest of hate, while its organisers are pitching it to conference goers as a chance to protect the future, learn and have fun.
Fun?
Here's Senator Patrick Dodson.
Locked up in a conference room with a clique of visiting right-wing nutters who shouldn't be allowed in the country. Protect the future? God save us if all of those that are in this bunch see themselves as our protectors.
Andrew Cooper is the conference director of CPAC Australia.
It's just a disappointing distraction. And let's face it, Nick, I mean, it's a stunt by Christina Keneally and the Labor Party. They're worried about virtual signalling to, hard left kind of anti-free speech interests, and they're just forgetting about what they're supposed to present, and that's essentially workers' interests. I think there's a mood to start rejecting this sort of political correctness gone mad. So in that sense, I can understand Donald Trump's Jr.'s tweet. It is a little bit insane, and it's got to stop at some point.
Andrew Cooper, the conference director for CPAC Australia, ending that report from Nick Grimm. It's 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, last night, Checkpoint revealed that former staff of a Canterbury-based building firm say they're owed thousands of dollars in unpaid wages. Wellhouse Limited and its sister company Wellstruct are owned by businessman Dan Tremewen. But the staff aren't the only ones who say they haven't been paid. Christchurch painting firm DC Painting says it too is owed about $10,000 from Wellhouse for a job that it carried out last year. DC Painting owner David Christensen spoke to our Christchurch reporter Anand Zaki.
So this was last year. We would have started there in around October and finished up in December, end of December, which is when we were due for our next progress payment that never came to us.
And so because that payment didn't come, you guys obviously didn't...
No, we weren't going to go back until we got the money, and then it dragged out further and further, and to this day we've never seen the money, so...
How much work had you already done?
So that goes through my records. I'm pretty sure we started sort of middle October, so we'd probably received a small progress payment at the end of October. We did all of November. We received a progress payment for that, and then we did all of December. And so we were due a progress payment at the end of December, and that's the one that never arrived.
That was $10,000.
So it was actually more than that. It was about $13,800 that we'd billed them for. I was dealing at the time with a guy called who was the project manager there. So when the 31st December came, we didn't get our money. I contacted him. He was like, "Well, I'm on holiday now," and I said, "Well, this money's meant to be paid by the end of December. We all want to go on holiday." And he sort of said, "Well, look, I've got access to a small amount of funds." So he paid the $3,800, and so there was still $10,000 still owing. So I just kept emailing him every week, and obviously he came back from holiday, went back to work there, and kept promising every week, there's funds coming in, and it never came. He ended up leaving the place, and then so I was dealing with a new accounts manager there. He kept promising the same thing. There's money coming in, and it just never came at all.
$10,000 for a small trader like you guys, it's not a small amount, is it?
It's not that small amount, and it was right over Christmas, so we had no money over Christmas. The money that we did receive, the $3,800, was actually money that we'd already paid out for paint, so we had to pay that to the paint company, so that didn't go too far.
That was Christchurch painter David Christensen talking to our reporter Anand Zaki. It's 21 minutes. In response to David Christensen's claim, Wellhouse founder Dan Tremewen says he isn't close enough to individual cases to comment, but he says he believes delayed payments relate to clients owing Wellhouse hundreds of thousands of dollars. 21 and a half minutes past 6. New Zealand football say they're cautiously optimistic about where their bid stands after confirmation of an increase in teams for the next Women's World Cup. Following the success of this year's tournament in France, global governing body FIFA has announced the 2023 tournament will expand from 24 to 32 teams. Now that's left New Zealand and the 8 other countries who have registered to submit hosting bids needing to now re-evaluate those bids if they want to remain in contention. Those decisions hinge on updated hosting requirements, which are expected to be provided by FIFA before the 19th of August. Sports reporter Clay Wilson spoke to New Zealand Football Chief Executive Andrew Pragnell about the expansion news and started by asking him how it changed things with their bid.
Obviously, 8 more teams is going to change things a bit. In early conversations with FIFA, they indicated it may not change the compliance that much, but actually the devil is always in the detail in these things. And so what they haven't done yet is send out the change in specifications of hosting requirements. And so that document's due with us before the 19th of August, or in the next 2 weeks, hopefully. And we'll be pushing for earlier. So we really need to take stock of that, and if actually the compliance requirements and specifications around stadiums, training sites, accommodation have changed, then that'll give us a clear steer on where our bid's at.
Just initially, any thoughts on how much it does affect your overall chances of being successful?
Yeah, I guess I'm a mix of being cautiously optimistic and also a realist. So I hope that FIFA have taken good account of the effort, that 9 countries have put into their bids to date. And, we were planning on submitting our bid on the 4th of October. So optimistic, but also realise things could change. So I'll reserve judgment until I see that document. But, to date, all of the work that we've had working groups working closely with FIFA staff, they've been really positive about our bid. We've certainly received a lot of positive feedback from a lot of countries who'd like to see New Zealand host it. So I still think we're in a good position, but the specification document will tell all.
Do you believe you've got some wiggle room there in terms of not only the stadiums, which are obviously key, but like you mentioned there, other facilities such as accommodation? I mean, how much wiggle room do you have above and beyond what you already have tabled?
I'd like to think so, but until I see the documents, I know that obviously, with football being a global game, and if there's a real appetite from FIFA to see their premier events played in all parts of the world, there has to be flexibility. Otherwise, we're only going to see a few countries host events as significant as this. So, and I'd also like to think actually that this is potentially, given the size of the event, our last opportunity to host it, that some flexibility would be applied. But I guess we'll see when that document comes out.
Is that how you're viewing it, that this is perhaps your last opportunity to host a major FIFA event and you want to pour as much resource and time into it to try and make it successful?
Yeah, look, obviously we need to walk hand in hand with the government in terms of making sure we approach the bid with some caution, if you like. But actually, you're right. We're of the view that this event is effectively growing exponentially, doubling in size, cycle on cycle. 2027, if it continues to grow at this rate, which everyone would anticipate it will, it would be out of our reach, as is the Men's World Cup. To host it as a sole country. Sure, we'll be able to host age grade events again, as we have done successfully in the past, but we don't think we could, as a sole country, host an event of this size and scale in 2027 at this stage.
New Zealand Football Chief Executive Andrew Pragnell there, speaking to Clay Wilson about their prospective bid for the 2023 Women's World Cup. Confirmation of the official host nation is set to be announced in May next year. It's 25 minutes past 6. One of Broadway's most successful directors and producers, Hal Prince, has died at the age of 91. He won 21 Tony Awards and directed productions including Cabaret, Sweeney Todd, Evita and Phantom of the Opera. The BBC's arts correspondent Vincent Dowd looks back at his life.
Hal Prince started out as a stage manager. Before long, he was producing Broadway shows such as, in 1957, West Side Story.
When you're a jet all the way from your first cigarette to your last dying day. When you're a jet, if the...
Prince took on the show at the urging of the young lyricist, Stephen Sondheim. Another producer had bailed out, fearing the story and Leonard Bernstein's score lacked commercial appeal. An audition was arranged.
Lenny played the score very loudly because he was nervous, because it was, after all, a very audacious project. Steve sang the lyrics with Lenny, and by the time we'd left, we had decided to produce the show.
But Prince wanted to make the rare transition from producing shows, mainly sorting out the cash, to directing what's on stage. In 1966 came a huge hit, Cabaret.
Welcome and bienvenue, welcome in Cabaret, oh Cabaret.
In the 70s and 80s, Hal Prince directed 6 Stephen Sondheim shows, including Company and Sweeney Todd. He'd become what he always wanted to be, the preeminent director of musicals on Broadway.
Don't cry for me, Argentina.
But not only on Broadway. When, in London in 1978, Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice wanted someone to bring Evita to the stage, there could be only one choice. Prince took more Tony Awards in New York than anyone else. When, in his 80s, he worked on a show of greatest hits, it was called with justification Prince of Broadway.
Vincent Dowd reporting there at 27.5 minutes past 6. We finally can get to some of your feedback. As promised, a lot of it's been coming in tonight on the massive shake-up of Polytechs, the merge of 16 Polytechs coming next year. It's going to take years to roll out in full. But David has got in touch and he says, look, I'm biased because I'm an ex-Polytech lecturer. Thanks for that, David. He says he still thinks that they provide necessary training in smaller centres, and we should be using the Southland model to improve the failing ones. Joining good with bad in one super polytech will prove a failure. That's David, a former lecturer at a polytech. Another listener's got in touch and says Chris Hipkins' proposal for the polytechnics is typical socialist policy. Rob those who've been successful to support the inefficient. Poor managers is not the answer. Thanks for that view. And someone else, the government are thieves, taking the millions belonging to the two amazingly successful polytechnics, Otago and Southland. So certainly some voices from the south and some others from around the country, and saying basically that the good ones may suffer, or the successful ones, shall we use a better word, may suffer if they all merge into one. Simon from Raglan's also got in touch. He says, destroying efficient ITOs, that's the industry training organisations that deliver skilled workers cheaply to fix polytechs who offer a farce of courses and are losing money, is going in the wrong direction, Simon says. I'm training with the primary ITO and farming skills. I would not even consider training at a polytech, let alone the cost. That's Simon from Raglan. Thanks very much for getting in touch on that. There's more coming in from Jeanette. She says there could be course standardisation for apprentices across New Zealand without complete agglomeration of all 16 polytechs. Jeanette says the number of courses themselves could also just be minimised. Whole-scale change might be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, she says. New Zealand did that with tomorrow's schools. While we're at it, perhaps we have too many universities as well. Jeanette going along on that one. And finally, in relation to the opposition coming from Southern Institute of Technology specifically, most in the sector are for the change. This is someone who works for a polytechnic who's never had a loss. I think Southland are not listening to the needs of the country and could help form a coherent cooperative system. Thanks so much everyone for getting in touch with your feedback tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with Checkpoint. Ka kite anō.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A major shake-up of vocational education will see all 16 polytechnics rolled into one super institute responsible for most on-the-job training. Invercargill leaders are vowing to fight the merger, saying businesses are afraid it will kill off the successes of the Southland Institute of Technology in the region. A high-profile sportsman connected to an international drug syndicate may take his fight to retain name suppression to the Supreme Court. And a dog team has found no evidence of anyone caught up in this afternoon's avalanche near Queenstown. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather will be at 7 o'clock.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10. I think a lot of people think it's magical when they see a dragonfly.
I've been very enchanted by their lifestyle, by their beauty, by their spectacular displays in the air.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, is your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making